Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Campaign Operative Breakout Room. We're going to be having a conversation about community campaigns with Vivette Brackett and Brianna Mullen, who will be giving you an insider view of how to organize and build political power from your community to campaign. Before we get started, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the Indigenous people of our lands. This is integral for me in any space to take time to acknowledge whose lands I'm occupying. And with that being said, Ignite National acknowledges that we gather on the lands of multiple tribes across the United States. We honor with gratitude the land itself, the history of its people, and their resilience. This acknowledgement does not take place of authentic relationships with Indigenous communities, but serves as a first step in honoring the land we're on and recognizing the colonial history of the U.S. So if you want to know more about how to take action, you can always email me at my Ignite email. It's just my first name, julia@ignitenational.org. In Seattle, I live on occupied Duwamish lands, so I encourage you to text your city and state to a number I'm going to put in the chat. Learn whose lands that you occupy and do more research with that. That being said, my name is Julia Janin Shields. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm Seattle's Ignite Fellow. I'm a senior at the University of Washington studying urban planning and cultural communication. I joined Ignite because I care deeply about this work, specifically in regards to having more women of color represented in decision-making and in environmental justice and sustainability and policymaking for a better future. I grew up in the South Bay of the Bay Area, the San Francisco Bay Area, so I'm very excited to talk to our guests today, who are both based out of that region. I will introduce both of our panelists briefly before diving into the questions. Brianna Mullen, she uses she, her pronouns, is pursuing a master's degree in policy, organization, and leadership studies at Stanford's Graduate School of Education. Brianna aspires to remove barriers from students who seek to access quality public education through improvement science and peer-to-peer learning. She served as the policy advisor to the State Superintendent of Public Instruction, leading statewide policy initiatives and efforts to implement continuous improvement systems at the California Department of Education. She's also a co-founder of the racial justice organization SAC Change and is starting a nonprofit to help first generation and candidates of color learn how to run for school board called Education Justice Academy. Welcome, Brianna. Our second panelist is Vivette Brackett. She's a proud San Franciscan and has spent her entire life fighting for working families and progressive policies that help create social, racial, and economic justice for all. For the past 16 years, Vivette has owned the Brackett Group, which specializes in delivering transformational business consulting services to nonprofits and small businesses throughout the Bay Area. In 2019, Vivette founded the Big and Black and Brunch monthly meetup to help build community and the Black economic power base in San Francisco, one brunch at a time. In her free time, Vivette serves on various commissions and boards of directors for organizations throughout the San Francisco Bay Area. For her, representation matters. She hopes to inspire and help more women, immigrants, and Black residents obtain leadership roles on San Francisco commission and boards. Welcome, Vivette. Wow, just by reading your bios, I'm already so eager to learn more about the both of you, and I know that our audience is as well. For anyone listening, if you have any questions during this panel, please note them when we open the floor to questions later in the panel. All right, so we will get started, and either Brianna or Vivette can start for each of the questions. That's up to you. And our first question asks, what is your why? What about your work gets you up in the morning and helps keep you energized?
Okay, great. It's great to be here. I'm so glad to be here with you, Bet and Julia. My why really stems from the love I have for my community. A lot of the work that I've done in the last year has really centered about my adopted hometown, which is Sacramento, feeling like I can wake up every morning and do something to give back to the place that I live, and also about preserving the place that I want to, be part of community and partnership. So I realize that as somebody who's moved there, I have a lot to learn about Sacramento's history and its people and the amazing advocacy work that local grassroots groups are already doing. And I just want to work in partnership with them to feel like we can create the kind of community that is both sustainable for local residents who are already there and welcoming for new residents. And for me, that really starts with making sure that every Sacramentan is safe from police violence, and that we have local leadership that is centering racial justice as part of that history and legacy that we need to really make amends for and atone for.
So my why is probably steeped very deeply in my upbringing and being a San Francisco native of Afro-Latina descent, also a child of immigrants. I think my why is really steeped in history and the ways in which we work with community to repair the harms of history and to make it a more equitable society. We realize that we stand on the shoulders of all of these amazing people who came before us, who are constantly fighting for civil rights, human rights, environmental justice, all of these issues that impact the way that we show up in community. And so I feel like that's really what is my why every day. That is what goes behind all of the work that I do. That is what inspires me to sometimes wake up as early as 4:30 in the morning and sleep till 1 in the morning, is because I do believe in the power of the now. And I do believe that we as women have so much power. And it's just, we need to be around people who give us permission, and not even just permission, give us opportunity to flex that power and come up with the amazing solutions that have pretty much moved this world forward. And, I'm just excited to be here today, and just wanted to also give honor and respect to the land on which I currently am on. I'm in San Francisco. I am on Ohlone Ramaytush land. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm so excited to hear about everything you both have to say, and thank you for that. And if you're watching right now, take some time to reflect on your why as well. When I introduced the both of you, I talked a little bit about your organizations. Can you tell us both what your organizations do and why it's important for those aspiring to serve in office to engage and participate with grassroots organizations? And either of you can start.
I guess for me, for my organization, as kind of lightly mentioned, I'm also a brand new co-founder in a new organization called SF Black Wall Street. And that organization was kind of born out of a lot of the trauma that was happening last year with the Black Lives Matters movement, in terms of highlighting the deaths that were happening at the hands of law enforcement last year, specifically Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and as we right now know, the George Floyd case, which is currently happening as we speak. That is very sobering and is bringing up a range of emotions that people are feeling right now. And this even dates back to the Trayvon Martin, Oscar Grant trials and other things like that. And so we were last year, if you remember, we were steeped in the pandemic, especially in San Francisco. We were in shelter in place, and it was a very scary time for a lot of people because people weren't getting human connection. And as you know, within the African diaspora, human connection and celebration is something that really keeps us grounded and being able to kind of continue in this fight, because it is a fight for liberation. It is a fight for freedom. It is a fight for our humanity every day sometimes, and sometimes that can be very overwhelming, and compounding with the state of affairs that it was last year. Juneteenth was coming up, and in San Francisco specifically, Juneteenth has a very historic root in the city. I grew up in the Fillmore district, and that is primarily where Juneteenth was always celebrated. And Juneteenth just wasn't going to happen. And so 7 of us San Francisco natives got together, and we pretty much decided we were going to have a community Juneteenth that was COVID safe, and that it was going to celebrate our heritage. And within a week, we were able to raise almost $5,000 and receive tons of donations from various people throughout the community. And we had a wonderful, safe space. And through that, organizing and working together on budgets and picking up stuff and donations, we decided to create our organization that would be focused on 3 specific areas. Number 1, increasing the number of Black home ownership in San Francisco. 2, supporting Black businesses in San Francisco. And then 3, reclaiming spaces. A lot of people don't know the history of San Francisco, and that it was a lot of the institutions that we now see is very not Black, because we've been reduced to about 5% of the population. We actually created it, including our school district, the Port of San Francisco, the first bank, the first hotel, et cetera, et cetera. So that's where I came from.
Thank you. Wow, that is so incredible. And I encourage everyone to look up what Yvette's talking about and Black Wall Street. That's just amazing. Brianna, I can't wait to hear from you too about SAC Change.
Yeah, and SAC Change was born similarly in June of last year during the Black Lives Matter protests that were happening all across the country. Sacramento has, really a lot of blood on its hands, but particularly the murder of Stephon Clark by police rocked our community to its core a couple years ago. And then when the protests came about last June, I work on a children's commission and had been doing research on police violence with youth in our community, and started looking into, more the fact that Stephon Clark wasn't really an anomaly. There had actually been 54 police involved shootings in our community, 37 of which resulted in the murder of a local community member that have not been charged by our district attorney. And so, we knew that there was a lot of work that needed to happen in our community. And I am so lucky that I met two amazing young women, and I want to give them a shout out. Ashley Draper, who's a co-founder of SAC Change, who's going to be on a panel tomorrow, and her sister, Paris Draper, two amazing Black Sacramentans, Native Sacramentans, who I met at a protest, literally because I had a sign that said I wanted to recall the sheriff, and she had a sign that said she wanted to recall the DA. And we kind of did like a moment right there in the streets. And then we're like, are we going to do this? And then we did. And so we connected and started organizing and strategizing and making phone calls, doing research, trying to figure out why we had a district attorney and sheriff that were not only, so opposed to racial justice, but really, further marginalizing our communities of color on a day-to-day basis. And so we organized to try and translate some of the movement in the streets to the polls, and we saw 30,000 people in our community marching for justice. And we knew that, the DA's race in particular had seen massive voter suppression and reduction of turnout because of where it's placed in our primary in June during the gubernatorial year. So our first effort was to try and move the election from the gubernatorial year, the off-year elections, to the presidential years, where we know that there is a better turnout for our communities at large. It's more representative of our actual voters in our community. So we fought to move that to the presidential election. We were unsuccessful in our first campaign, but then we moved on to fight a campaign finance increase that our DA and sheriff were fighting for, to increase political campaign donations up to 5 times. And we know that police officer associations and police unions spend a lot of money in these races. And so we wanted to restrict, dark money in politics and our money in general in these races and make them more accessible. So we were successful in December, and we're able to beat back that finance increase, and that gave us a lot of hope and vision. And so, we're really focused on doing massive community outreach and education efforts leading up to our district attorney and sheriff race in 2022, to really make sure people understand how much power our local criminal justice officials have. And it's just been an amazing place to meet like-minded folks and really get folks to think about how much criminal justice touches on environmental issues, LGBT issues, domestic violence issues. There's really just so much power your local attorney has. I really had no idea until I started looking into it in the last year and a half, because I do education most of my life. So on the side, I'm helping build an accelerator. It's for first generation and candidates of color to run for school board. School boards are great first offices to hold, and our schools are in dire need of really great leadership and really great community support. And so I'm also building out a curriculum to help candidates who want to run for their local school board know how to, and do that in partnership with other school board members who are focusing on ethnic studies for all and reducing cops in schools and other progressive education policies.
Wow. I'm just so inspired by the both of you already. And each of you were touching on how this work has been something that you've been active in for a while in grassroots organizing. And so how has it changed with the pandemic? What are some of the greatest lessons that you've learned from campaigning during the pandemic, especially hearing that both of your organizations kind of started about a year ago amidst it all?
Yeah, the pandemic has been really interesting to navigate. In some ways, it's been there's been some things that have been easier in terms of connecting online. I think I'm really grateful for the fact, actually just this past weekend, I met one of the people I've been working with for 10 months for the first time in person. And so it was kind of one of those, old friends reuniting kind of situations, but you've never actually seen each other in person. And so I think you have to remember to create those spaces for community. What Babette said earlier, like, community is so powerful. And when you're doing this kind of organizing, I think there's a lot of people in the last year who really kind of were activated and they want to do something, but we have to slow down and remember to make space for people to come on board onto maybe grassroots work that they're not familiar with or that they're new to. I was very new to the grassroots community in Sacramento, although I had lived there for a couple of years. It was all happening behind the scenes. I wasn't involved. And so it was really amazing to schedule calls, Zoom calls with, elders, leaders, mentors, organizers who had been doing this for decades and just ask them and listen. I knew I had a lot to learn from them. And I knew that I didn't, there'd already been so much work that had happened in the past. And I wanted to know where I could plug in and what effort we could do that wasn't, yet being done. So having those connections and building that community and mentorship was, you had to be more strategic about it. It maybe didn't happen by accident the way that sometimes in-person organizing happens. But in many ways, utilizing technology and trying to create those community spaces online really actually gave me some amazing friendships this year that I've been really grateful for, because I didn't think I'd make a lot of new friends. And this has been the number one way that I have.
I think for in San Francisco and the Black community, in terms of things being virtual versus in person, has been both a challenge and a blessing. I will say it's challenging because in our communities, primarily on the southeast side of town, we are very digitally strapped. It's probably the best way. The digital divide is a real thing, especially here in San Francisco. The access to technology, the access to the internet, the access in ways that we can communicate, and then also online tools. Just a familiarity with them and being able to use them and stuff like that. And so what our group has been very good at, and some of the initiatives that have came out of our organizing were our Bring Back the Block, which was kind of a Friday, first Friday of the month, kind of organizing around supporting a Black business in Bayview called Cafe Envy, which later became the target of 311 calls. And so our community started learning more of the policies and practices that the city does. And through what we were experiencing, we reached out to other communities and realized that the same thing was happening in the Mission District and the Soma District, and that even during COVID, there was kind of like this anti-BIPOC for us just being in space in our own communities. And so that out of that, one of our co-founders, Tanish Hollins, has been leading up our Good Neighbor policy that we have been working with the city on and other organizations and cultural districts throughout the city to kind of address the ways in which 311 are weaponized under marginalized businesses. So in that sense, that's been some of our organizing. A lot of that work is also recognizing how much power we still have politically in San Francisco, and also the fact that your community should be able to determine how policies and procedures should be implemented in your community. Every community is different and not every policy is going to work the same. So for instance, in San Francisco, our shared spaces policy was very prohibitive to Black businesses because they didn't have extra money to do build outs for their restaurants and so forth. And so that activated us as a community to say, hey, community, would you guys like more restaurants? Yes. Would you guys like more caterers? Yes. How do we work together and how do we kind of help City Hall shape policies that are more equitable throughout the city. And so for us, it's not necessarily always been at the ballot box, but it has been in transformative policies that needed our voice to be able to shape them, because clearly City Hall didn't understand those micro issues that are happening in various neighborhoods. And through that, we were able to lobby with other organizations like Mega Black and SF Block and other organizations to kind of similar to decide how we want to distribute the funds that have been taken from law enforcement and reinvested into our communities in a way that creates opportunity, that creates community, and that creates a better life for every San Franciscan across the city.
Thank you so much for highlighting that too. I think especially amidst the pandemic, there's so much talk about, oh, things are more accessible now, but it's accessible for who? And really thinking about access to technology. And so I just really appreciate you highlighting that aspect of it. And kind of thinking about the things that each of you have said in terms of transitioning back towards in-person or whatever this new normal is going to look like as we start seeing people get vaccinated and hopefully COVID cases going down. What practices do you think will live on as we progress towards this in-person society?
Well, I think outdoor dining definitely is one of them that is going to be here to stay. I think that as we're looking at what's happening globally in terms of pandemics, we are seeing a second wave of COVID kind of impacting Europe and other places. And, we're going to be possibly next. And so, and I think that some people have enjoyed outdoor space, being able to have more walkable streets. One of the things we also did during the pandemic is we had some street closures and we had events that supported businesses and brought other businesses that may not have brick and mortars together. And so I think that there's going to be more of that kind of coalescing between similar or diverse businesses and ways that they're going to be able to use shared spaces, not just on the streetscape, but maybe even physical space in order to ensure that they thrive. I think one of the sad parts that's going to be here to stay is that there's still not going to be very much opportunity for a lot of in-person performers to be able to make an income. As we've seen because of COVID, we're just now starting to get kind of in-person performances, but because we've lost so many businesses, there's less spaces for our performing arts entrepreneurs to be able to showcase their art. And so it's going to be interesting to see how cities respond to that and et cetera.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, one thing that I think people have really started to realize is that our community spaces are sacred and our physical spaces are public, right? One thing that I was really, I loved during the last 6 months was that people had more time to be at home and be in their community. And I live in a place that's fairly walkable for some portions of our community. And then other parts of Sacramento, unfortunately, don't have sidewalks and aren't provided the same public infrastructure and resources, oftentimes in low income, Black and Latinx spaces in Sacramento. And so really you started to see the disparity in who had access to livable public spaces during the pandemic. And, one thing that I hope doesn't end, in organizing is this reliance on some extent digital organizing that can not only allow people to connect off different geographic spaces and connect, we have a pretty big county, so there's elements of the county that are very rural. And, one aspect that we often feel like is we're losing voices, especially non-incorporated parts of our county sometimes get forgotten and they're, can be very low income. And so there's often this focus on the urban or focus on the metro area, but, increasing geographic diversity in our organizing has been really interesting. The other thing is just that, so many of our organizers in Sacramento are women of color. I would probably edge to say 80% of them are women of color. And, many of them are also running businesses and parents and community members. And so just sometimes the flexibility that some digital organizing has given to people to catch up later, to watch a recording. We did a series of StreamYard educational town halls in the fall on Prop 17, Prop 20, and Prop 25 to educate our community members about those important criminal justice propositions. And we were able to share those videos later online on Facebook, and where they garnered a lot more views over the course of the weeks, leading up to the election than necessarily live. And so I think that, finding ways to allow, women especially who take on more burdens than they deserve at home and in the community space, more flexibility to participate, more flexibility to have their voice heard, because, in our public meetings, I know when we were fighting our campaign finance increase, we spent 8 hours on hold just to give public comment to a county supervisor meeting. So that's not something that working people can do. And that's not something, I think that the barriers that government has put on working people to be able to participate in government are so high as it is. So if you're doing local community organizing, thinking about the ways that you can use your digital tools in partnership, and just like Bivette said, take into consideration, who has access to those digital resources and what ways can you supplement digital organizing with in-person organizing. And so I'm very excited to get back to being in community and knocking on doors when it's safe again, and really, being in partnership and in community in person. But I've also been very grateful from the flexibility that digital organizing has given us.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one more thing to that I just wanted to just throw in there. Another thing that's going to stay with us is also the increase of voting by mail.
Yeah.
As you saw, the California Democratic Club Party this year went to all kind of online registration. And so I think there's going to be an expansion for online voter registration as well. And I think those are the things that are going to stay. The challenge is going to be for, especially, again, our communities and women organizers to be able to actually get people to turn back in their ballots, register and all of that. And we saw that as one of the big challenges with the KDEM process this year, which was both, there was some good, there was some bad, and a lot of people have feelings and thoughts of how to improve that process moving forward.
Yeah, thank you so much for that too. Oh no, go ahead, Brianna. I love this.
One more thing.
I love you guys popcorning back and forth.
She just made me think of it. I absolutely agree. I mean, vote by mail, it was huge. And when you look at other states outside of California who don't have access to vote by mail, we saw that massive voter disenfranchisement in November, as well as what's going on in Georgia. And I worked the polls in November. And one thing that was really clear to me in my community was that day of voter registration, which we call conditional voter registration, or CVR in California, where any voter can walk into a polling place and register to vote conditionally and vote that same day. So they're registering and voting at the same time. We had 20% of our votes the day before election day and the day of election day that were CVR. So, even though we've seen massive increases in vote by mail, we need to really protect, the states that have already increased conditional voter registration and expand it in other places, because I saw so many first-time voters, young people, I saw voters of color, I saw immigrants, I saw refugees who were voting for the very first time. They had just changed addresses because they were moving from apartment to apartment. And we know that, all of these things are correlated to race and income. So, protecting conditional voter registration and making sure that it's available and that your poll workers know about it, know that, what the law says about it is going to be equally important moving forward.
Yeah. And don't forget first-time candidates. I just wanted to state that because I actually ran a slate of first-time candidates, Black candidates throughout the city, called the People Delegates for ADEM. And there were actually, we ran a slate of 10 candidates on the east and west side of the city. And this is the first time many Black people stepped up to even run for office for their first time. So it was particularly interesting for me to walk them through that process and just walk their families through too. Because, during the pandemic, like you said, there's no street organizing. So how do we phone bank? How do you text bank? How do you use all of the different tools in a campaign with marginalized communities, and what is going to be the return rate of your efforts.
All of these nuggets of wisdom, I'm like taking notes. And that really transitioned us well to our next question, which is, what advice do you both have for future political leaders when it comes to gaining support or partnership with organizations, whether that be grassroots like those that you both have or others that they're seeking? So just general advice for partnerships and just starting grassroots campaigns.
Yeah, I think that one thing that was really important to us in founding a new organization was to really do our homework and make sure that we weren't trying to do something that had already existed before. We were both very tentative about taking that step in, and that can be a hard tension to navigate, because sometimes, you know, that anxiety can stop you from doing something, and it absolutely should not, right? You should continue to move forward and do that organizing work, either in partnership with other organizations. So like I said, the first thing that we did before we even really started doing anything was just schedule phone calls and ask them, hey, what's going on in this space? What can you tell me about this? Has there been previous organizing efforts on this? Who's focused on this issue right now? And when we did our homework, we realized actually there isn't anybody doing this specific work. There is a place for us to organize grassroots people to specifically focus on the DA and sheriff race in a way that hasn't been done before in Sacramento County. And then the other thing we did was we looked for models across the country that we could look towards. So I was a history undergraduate major, so I'm all about doing my homework and doing my research. And so we looked into grassroots organizations like Decarcerate Philly and Decarcerate LA, the People's Budget LA, other organizations that had already done a lot of the same organizing work and had won, right? So Decarcerate Philly was one of the main organizations that helped launch the coalition for the People's DA that elected Larry Krasner. He was one of the very first progressive prosecutors in the country. Similar coalitions were formed in Chicago to elect Kimberly Fox, a Black woman who was elected prosecutor there. So really trying to find other models. Organizing, sometimes you can feel like you're reinventing the wheel, and there's just so many great models to pull from. And so we would email them and say, hey, will you get on the phone with us and tell us about what you did and what worked and what didn't? And that just saved us a ton of time to feel like we could learn from them, take lessons, take best practices, and apply them to our community with our community knowledge.
I think if there's any advice I can give someone is authenticity and putting in the work. I think people don't value as much how much work goes into community work. I think a lot of people don't always recognize the heroes that are right next to you in community. And so some of the work that we do is about elevating those voices that sometimes they're the worker bees, and preparing people for leadership in ways that we recognize their skills and tell them and encourage them to step up. And I feel like this is kind of where this conference is about as well. It's like being your authentic self, showing up, living out your true values, and finding out where are the common people who have those shared values. And I think that that's really huge around building any kind of community movement. And even if you're looking towards possibly running for office one day, you really have to build within your own community and work on the issues that you're most passionate about. And then you become kind of an expert or known in that space and a go-to person. And then people kind of rely on you, and they're like, hey, this person knows a lot, or this person has been showing up for these issues, you know, and it makes it that much easier for people to come out and support you when you're not quite sure. Because a lot of things too people don't recognize is that women, we suffer a lot from imposter syndrome, and where we don't feel like we're good enough. And whereas men, they probably would have never worked in any of these spaces, but they're like, hey, I'm a guy, I deserve to be in the front. And I think that more of us women need to take that kind of spirit, like, why not me? You know, why not me? I've been working, I've been doing the work. Why not me step into a leadership role? Why not me put my hat out there and run for office, and start leaning on mentors and other women that I respect or that I know have already been in this space? And it's key and important to have mentors as well and reach out to other women. Because one thing that I found throughout this whole process of me, because I was actually one of those people that always worked behind the scenes and kind of came to the front, and people were like, what, you've been around this long behind the scenes? And I'm like, yeah. And then when I show the pictures, they're like, oh wait, you changed your hair. And I'm like, yeah, every Black woman, we change our hair every week, we look different. And so, it was just kind of exciting to see how many other women came and supported me. And I think that we as women, if we continue to support each other, continue to show up for each other, the sky's the limit. And I just want to also give a plug to Emerge, who also graciously accepted me into their boot camp program. In 2019, right before the pandemic, I went through their November boot camp, and that really gave me a lot of education and information about running campaigns and being able to be a better candidate. So just want to say that as well.
That made me laugh so hard about the comment with the hair, because I completely understand. Before we open the floor to questions, our last question is, what is some inspiring things that maybe you have been told, as you were saying, that it's important to have mentors? So what are some inspiring things that you've been told from mentors that you can share with young women that might have inspired you in your journey that you hope to carry forward to the next generation of political leaders?
Yeah, I loved what Babette said about mentors, because they're huge. And I have found also that in community work and organizing work, you find female mentors who are your age, older, younger. There's just so much intergenerational knowledge that's being shared in community organizing circles, and that I'm really appreciative of. And so also trying to think about, as I'm moving through, bringing new people in to receive that same mentorship that I've been blessed with. But a couple, quotes that I love from some amazing women in Sacramento. Kulik Koenig, she loves to say, "Many hands make light work." I love that, because I think as women, we often want to take on the world on our shoulders, and we want to do it all by ourselves. And so reminding us that when we bring new people into the work, we're building the capacity for the community to hold, our elected leaders accountable. Like Babette, I like being behind the scenes. I like holding our elected leaders accountable. And so, bringing more people in and helping them learn about how to do that and all the bureaucratic ways the government can work and silences marginalized voices, is important to do that leadership. But one of my favorite quotes from J.D. Anderson is just that feminism isn't about making women strong. Women are already strong. It's about changing the way the world perceives that strength. And I think that that's important, because the important thing that we can do as female organizers in the space is also look to our female counterparts and say, hey, you should raise your hand. You should be in that role, right? We can hype each other up. And that was one of our goals, in finding an amazing district attorney candidate, which we have done and have been working with. And she's not quite announced yet, but keep your eyes tuned for late June for an amazing candidate in Sacramento to announce as district attorney. And, really, we went to her and said, hey, you need to run, right? And then she, was probably already going to do it. But, hearing it from the community, I think helps. And so you can do that for yourself, and you can also do that for the women around you.
There's so many amazing quotes by women who've come before me. Like, how many can I name? If you want to sit at the table, bring up your own folding chair. I mean, there's so many that are funny. There's other ones that I feel really inspire me, because a lot of times it's really hard work to step out there, because a lot of times, as we know, in politics, sometimes some of these decisions are made way in advance of elections and stuff like that. And sometimes hard things happen along the campaign trail. So my most inspirational one is you're doing something right if people are mad at you. It's probably my favorite one, because it just encourages women to keep pressing on no matter how hard things are, because we have a conviction in our heart. And I feel that we want to do what's right, and we want to have that transformative change in our communities that can only happen on, through policy. And there are always going to be people who want to keep the status quo, which doesn't actually help bring about equity. And we need to become more unapologetic in our voice I'm unapologetic on truth telling, because a lot of times people don't realize that within the political sphere, it's also scary. There's a lot of people with more power, and you can piss people off by saying things that may be uncomfortable truths that everyone doesn't want to deal with. And so I just want to say, honor your truth, speak your truth, and be true. And that's why I feel like authenticity is a thing. And that's my inspirational words.
So first of all, I have to say that I'm also very biased because I think that you are amazing organizers, both of you. And I just want to thank you for joining us today. And Julia, this is our future. We're doing this work to prepare her to take the baton and to run with it. And when she's done, pass that on as well. And so it's very incredible to hear your stories, the quotes from people who inspire you, but also that community it takes to win campaigns. You have to know the movers and shakers on the ground, which the two of you are. I have you connected to, each of you connected to so much work in the Bay Area to Sacramento that I had to give this opportunity for both of you to really share the work you're doing in San Francisco and in Sacramento. And then I want to shout out Julia. She's young, she's from the Bay, she's ambitious. This is our little sis. And so we have to take this knowledge and hand this off to make sure that she's successful in this work in whatever part she sees herself in. So I just want to take this opportunity to say thank you to all of you for joining. We have about 8 minutes left. So I'd like to say, is there anything that you would like to tell Julia and Julia's, the young women we have here at Ignite, when it comes to if they're going to run for office, or they're going to be the campaign manager, or they're going to be the co-founder of an organization? If you could just take a minute or two just to give some insight, because sometimes we've all talked about being disappointed. How many times we've been disappointed? But what are some motivation and inspirations that we can give to the young women that are tuned in, as well as Julia, in their path down to some sort of political engagement, and to be a judge, or be the DA, to be city council, governor? So if you have any advice, I'll let you go ahead and start, Brianna.
Sure. Yeah, disappointment. I think that's something that I'm really glad you named that, Shay, because I went to my first Ignite conference when I was at Berkeley almost a decade ago now. And I remember knowing that the work was going to be hard. And I think, one thing that I've really learned in the decade plus since then is just that you have to build really strong relationships with people who are going to hold you up when the work is really hard, because there is going to be campaigns that you lose, and there are going to be candidates that don't win that should. And, I took, the loss of, the primary candidacy for presidential Warren really hard, and, just feeling like it's still very hard for women to run for office. And I realized that it's taken decades, and in many cases, hundreds of years of anti-Blackness and institutional racism and misogyny that really has shaped our political system. So, I think holding that disappointment and knowing that it's not forever, and that it's not going to be forever, because people like Julia are going to change it. And each person like Julia and yourselves who kind of get involved make it that much easier. And so I'll just go back to that many hands make light work, because I think that there are amazing people doing the work, and the more of us that hold our hands out and do that in partnership, women are so good at that. We're so good at doing the work and not asking for the credit. But I think if we do it a little less of not taking credit for it, and a little bit more of celebrating each other when we do the credit for it, I think that's what's important. So celebrate your sisters, when they're doing that work, hold them up when maybe it doesn't work out the way that they thought it would, and then just stay together and stay strong so that you can get to the next battle, because there is always another one around the corner. And taking care of yourself can be hard. And I think that's one thing that we've learned in the pandemic, is that, probably every 3 weeks, there's something that the sheriff does that pisses me off that I feel the need to respond to. And I have to remember sometimes to protect my own energy too, and just focus on the things that we really want to get done, and what Sac Change really wants to focus on, which is making systemic change, in criminal justice policy in our county. So stay rested, drink lots of water, have good friendships, good female friendships, and celebrate one another, because it is really hard work. And I'm so excited that you're, taking it on with us. And I know to reach out to us when you need help.
Vivette?
I think for me, it's kind of funny. I'm like a rainbow bright girl. I just want everybody to get along. It's like, I love everybody. So initially, when I was starting the People's Delegate Slate to kind of highlight Black people that wanted to run for office, I was disappointed because I was like, some people didn't want to be on the slate, even though they were of African descent, because they felt that they would be pressured politically to not be on the slate. And so at first I was like disappointed, but then I was like, oh, let's just run with it. I'm still like for team all of everybody. It's array, everything Black, I guess. And we ran our slate and only one person won. So we were kind of disappointed because we were getting a lot of momentum, a lot of support on the ground, but it just didn't turn out that way in terms of, the ballots being counted, them being given out. There were a lot of issues in terms of people being able to get their ballots and mail it in by the deadline. However, the great thing that happened after that is that another one of our slate mates actually got appointed as a delegate. And through that organizing and them seeing themselves individually in collective power, there's also we also identified that we need to do a lot more political education and civic education and civic work in just the Black community in terms of understanding, again, similar to the work on SF Black Wall Street, but more towards the business side. How do we work as a community with government? How do we work with our local supervisor, with our, district representatives? How do we, get resolutions on, approved at the DCCC, and how do we move it up the state, and that larger organizing. And so some of the members did join the Black Caucus, and so they're going to be plugged into there where they can get additional political education. And we are kind of framing out what we want to do in the next year. And so I think that that's been an amazing part of the disappointment, is that there's always room and time to change and make things better. So I'm excited about the future.
Well, thank you. Julia, do you have anything else that you want to say?
No, just thank you so much for making the time to talk with all of us. I know all of the other young women that are watching are very inspired. I know that I am, and I will be sure to reach out. So thank you. And everyone, also go look more at the work that they're both doing. When I found out I was moderating this panel with the both of you, I looked you up and I was like, wow, so inspired. So definitely look more into it and how you can support their organizations too.
Any last words?
Anybody who wants to run for school board, reach out to me.
I just want to say thank you. It was an honor to be here today. Thank you, Shay, and thank you, Julia, for putting this together, and Brianna for being a co-host. And just want to say, if anyone wants to reach out to me to learn about any of the organizations I work with, like SF Pride, Bay Area Legal Aid, or various different ones, feel free to contact me. I'm kind of like an open book, and you can find me on Instagram or Facebook as Bavette. So my profile is open and public because I just share.
Thank you so much, Shay and Bavette. I learned so much from you today. And Julia, I'm so excited for the work you're going to do. So amazing way to spend a beautiful day.
Again, thank you both, and Julia, for your leadership and being the great moderator that you always are. And we will get that information out to you, how you can follow up with these two amazing leaders. You can follow them on Instagram. We've been putting it here at the bottom, rotating, to make sure that you can reach out to them. And thank everyone for tuning in. And again, thank you three for being here today.